Today I'm going to tell the story about how a boy from the mean streets almost made it into polite society here in Thailand. I grew up on the mean streets of Manhattan between Chinatown and Little Italy. Well, we didn't call it mean streets back then. That came from a Martin Scorsese movie starring Robert De Niro as Johnny Boy. Scorsese must have done his homework because in our neighborhood, anybody named Johnny Boy was basically a psychopath. And that's the kind of character De Niro was playing. We had a Johnny Boy when I grew up. And from the time we were about 12 years old, I knew Johnny Boy was not going to end up really well. I don't know if he ended up like the Robert De Niro character, but the last I heard, he had been arrested for stealing a car and running over a fire hydrant. I wish him luck, but I don't think it's going to happen that way. Well, in 1968, I had just graduated from Long Island University and was thinking, well, now what am I going to do? I did have a job at a YMCA in the athletic department there. That was okay, but it wasn't going anywhere. At that time, the war in Vietnam was going on, and I had been opposed to the war. I was on the March on the Pentagon in 67. 68, I was at the Poor People's Campaign. So I was one of those liberal guys and didn't want to go to war, but I did love my country and I wanted to serve. So I applied to join the Peace Corps, and luckily I was accepted for a project here in Thailand. And I've told that story before. You might want, I'll put it in the description and you can check that out. When we got to Thailand, I really, I had this ideology that I was an idealist. I wanted to be like a native Thai. We don't use that term anymore, but we did back then. We called them host nationals. So I wanted to do everything they did, even though it was in the words of Tom Hanks in the movie Volunteers. He said, "This feels like it's a mile from the sun." It was so hot. I knew I could take it, and I decided we were going to we were invited to the U.S. Embassy to meet the American ambassador. Now that was going to be a big deal. Coming from where I came to meet the ambassador, that was a big deal. Now I had just had a big deal in Hawaii. The last days in Hawaii, we were sworn in by the governor of Hawaii. So that was cool. I got to meet the governor of a state. And now I was going to meet the ambassador, the American ambassador to Thailand. And that would make my day. I was going to join a real society by that time, the big time. That morning, I went out to have breakfast. So I decided for breakfast to have a bowl of noodles or bowl of guetio. And along with the guetio always comes a little bowl of fish sauce and peppers. So I was going to be a native, right? So I took the whole thing and dumped it into my noodles. That would be the first of my mistakes living in Thailand. One of the worst, but the first. Well, I ate the noodles and it was so hot. I had never felt anything like this before. I never knew what these little peppers were. They're called prickinu, which means mouse shit peppers because they are the shape of little mouse turds. And they're the hottest things that I have ever experienced. I guess there are some hotter peppers, but not very much hotter. I was really close to dialing 911 and calling for an ambulance because I didn't think I was going to survive this. My blood pressure must have been like 300 and my heart was beating about 500 beats a minute. I couldn't even stand up. But after about an hour of just drinking water, which is the worst thing to do, and trying to calm down, I felt better. Now, that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was to come, because that afternoon we were going to have a reception at the ambassador's house, at the embassy. I was still suffering from the effects of the heat and the hotness. There's a difference between heat and hotness, and I I was experiencing both at the same time. So we all got into a bus, all about 70 of us, and we were all new volunteers. Before our meeting at the embassy, we were going to meet with a couple of American officers who were going to give us a briefing on the Vietnam War. Now, the reason we had a briefing on the Vietnam War was that we were volunteers and there was an insurgency going on in certain parts of Thailand, and that they were, concerned that we might, be affected by this insurgency. So we should know everything possible about what was going on in Vietnam so that we could take care of ourselves and maybe explain ourselves to people. So we went into a room, I guess it was associated with the embassy, to meet with these officers. Now, I'm not making this up, but our scheduled meeting was with General Wagstaff. But he couldn't come, so Colonel Lance was his substitute, and he was going to give us the briefing. Now, these sound like these names sound like they come from Dr. Strangelove, but they were real names. In fact, General Wagstaff, just do a Google search and you'll find out he was there when I was there. But he was a little too busy being a general in Vietnam, and he had some stuff to do in Vietnam. So our briefing was finished, and now it was time to go meet the ambassador. That's when I began to get the fever. Now, I thought it was just like, it was 100 degrees and I thought it was just hot. But now I had a fever. I was really sweating and I was sick. I think it was the first case of food poisoning that I would experience in Thailand. Not the last case, but the first case. And this was only in my third day of being in country. So I was getting hotter and hotter and sweating and sweating. And then the cramps began. If you've ever had food poisoning, or salmonella maybe, this was not the best feeling in the world. So the cramps were beginning and I was getting sick. And then I knew what was coming next. I could feel it way down there. So at this time, I'm on the reception line to meet the ambassador. And the ambassador was Leonard Unger. And he was a pretty experienced American diplomat. Everybody knew his name, and he was pretty famous. I think he later became an ambassador in China. And he was a pretty famous dude. So I was really impressed, but at the same time, I was feeling like a dog. And I got on the reception line and moved slowly because he shook hands with each of us. And he was asking everyone, where they came from and wishing us good luck in our assignments. I'm moving up. I finally got to Mrs. Unger. She was, standing right before the ambassador. So Mrs. Unger. And at that point, I had lost it. I was going to explode. So Mrs. Unger said, "Congratulations, young man, and welcome to Thailand." And my response to that was, "Excuse me, Mrs. Unger, where's your bathroom?" Well, Mrs. Unger was an experienced diplomat herself, or wife of a diplomat. So she looked at me and knew exactly what was going on. And she pointed me and got an aide to guide me to the bathroom, where I stayed for probably the next hour. I did finally get out of the bathroom and I crawled over to the sunken living room where Ambassador Unger was giving a speech, or he was kind of finalizing his speech on our, our experience here in Southeast Asia and how we were helping the Vietnamese people be free from communism. And that's about the last I heard because I fell asleep. And I didn't wake up until all of my colleagues were out on having lunch, and there was a buffet, beautiful, beautiful buffet at the embassy. And of course, I couldn't partake of anything. I just kind of crawled over, and that was the end of my entering the big time in Thailand. I never did get to meet the ambassador. I did meet ambassadors later, different ones, being here in Thailand, and I met a lot of princes and princesses and things like that. So I eventually did reach the big time, but not on that day. That day will go down in my history of infamy. So that's how a boy from the mean streets almost made it into the big time.